Hey, what is going on, BSG family? Today I'm going to be talking about how we develop our pitchers here at Baseball Specific Training and the philosophies we use. I think the more broad point of getting better in not just baseball but anything in life is taking or having some sort of framework to base everything off of, right? So the biggest thing we talk about and why I have this written up here is if we see 1.01 to the 365th power is 37.8. But whereas if we have just 0.99 to the 365th power, it only comes out to 0.03. And this really just illustrates how if we're only getting 1% better every single day, it really exponentiates over the course of a year. Whereas if we're getting 1% worse every single day throughout the year, we're just not going to cut it. And I think that this really plays on how we get 1% better every day. A lot of people harp on we need to work harder, we need to push ourselves harder, but I think the biggest thing that we talk about here is making sure the work we're doing is productive, right? We're not losing ground, we're working on the correct things. So whatever we teach anyone anything, we always revert back to our stem or our basis of knowledge or our theories here. And today I'm going to illustrate our theory on pitching. So the biggest thing in pitching and how we want to develop as a pitcher, and as you get to the higher and higher levels, the barrier to entry is always velocity. It happened to me, it happens to a lot of guys I know. A lot of doors shut once you can't reach X miles per hour. As you can see in the big leagues, average fastball velocities are going up almost at an exponential rate at this point. You got early 2000s, we had 89 mile an hour fastballs, 90 mile an hour fastballs. But now we're looking at averages of 94 to 95 and we're climbing ever so slightly. So the thing is when we get guys coming in the door, the first thing we ask them is what are their goals? And if their goals are they want to play college or professional baseball, a lot of their work is going to have to be on their kinematic sequencing, their strength, and how do we throw the ball harder to be able to get into the door in order to prove ourselves on the mound. And a lot of people will kind of combat this statement saying, oh, what about accuracy? What about accuracy? And my philosophy and our philosophy here on accuracy is more of, all it is a release point, right? So if I'm releasing the ball right here, that's a strike, correct? But once I bring it up about 2 or 3 inches, now we're throwing a ball. As our kinematic sequencing gets better and we start throwing the ball harder, the relevance or the way we are releasing the ball is going to change every time we make an adjustment. So we believe here is find the sequencing, move our body efficiently, and then find the accuracy later. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of get into our theory and what we always stem back to when we have guys making adjustments. So there's a study done that proves that there's a high correlation between high trunk velocity, so high torso rotational movements and linear movements, and high fastball velocities. A lot of people would think that, okay, I want to throw the ball harder, I need to move my arm faster. But the issue is a lot of the studies that come back, it proves that the higher the trunk can move, or the faster the trunk can move, the harder we can throw. And it's a pretty simple analogy we can use that a lot of people can relate to is if we're sitting in a car, we're driving, let's say 80 miles an hour, and I have a ball in my hand, I put down my window and I drop the ball is still moving 80 miles an hour, right? So the thing is that I didn't use my arm to throw the ball out of the window, I just dropped it, but because the car was moving at that given speed of 80 miles an hour, the ball is moving as such. Same thing with pitching, right? If we could move, in theory, our trunk, let's say 80 miles an hour without using any sort of arm, we're gonna throw 80 miles an hour, right? So the biggest thing we try and work on here is trunk rotation and trunk linear movement speeds, okay? So whenever you're making an adjustment with pitching, I would recommend that you want it to fall under one of these two categories, right? So if we come over to the board, I'll erase this, right? So we have, right, these linear forces with our chest, right? And we'll start with linear, right? We have our linear forces. So we'll start with that. So if you look at big pitchers, right, you'll notice that a lot of them throw hard. And it's no wonder why most pitchers in the big leagues are over 200 pounds, right? They create a lot of linear force which creates a lot of linear trunk velocity going at the target. So if we look at up here, right, the physics equation that we use for linear forces with pitching is represented as, right, so we have force, okay, let's say F equals change in momentum, so P, over time, okay? So again, force equals change in momentum over time. So as a pitcher, we have our mass, right? And momentum, okay, I'll also explain momentum for some people. So we have momentum, so P equals mass, let's just say times acceleration. So the bigger we are and the faster we can move, in theory, the harder we're gonna throw if we can change the time of the momentum, right? So if we're, let's say we're 200 pounds, we move X miles an hour, okay? Once we stop that force, all that energy is gonna transfer out, okay? So again, okay, we want to create as much momentum coming down the mound, okay? And then with our front leg, we wanna stop all that momentum. Another analogy using a car that we can relate this back to is that if we're driving in a car, okay, we have a car, excuse my drawing, we have a car right here, okay? We're driving, let's say we're going 40 miles an hour, okay? Okay, and we come up and we hit a wall, brick wall, okay? What is the person in that car gonna do, right? Our car is gonna hit the wall, the energy is gonna transfer to the human in the car, and in theory, the person should fly through the windshield, creating that force production, okay? And how do we relate that to pitching, okay? So we have a pitcher, okay? We have a pitcher right here, okay? Back leg is the car. Okay, we're creating that potential energy with the back leg, which is the car. Okay, and then we get into front foot strike on the mound right here. Okay, and what we want to do with that front leg is stop as fast as we can all of that forward momentum, all of that power, all that velocity with that front leg acting as the wall. And in theory, that energy that we're changing, right? That force, we're changing momentum as quickly as possible. And in theory, right, that should transfer up to our chest, driving our chest over our front foot with velocity, right? So this we're talking about right now is our chest creating linear forces going that way, which creates more velocity. Okay? So again, just to talk about linear forces, okay? We want to use our back leg and our body to create as much momentum, as much speed going down the mountain as possible. Then with our front leg, we're bracing up that force as fast as we can, acting like a brick wall. And then what happens is by changing that momentum, our chest drives out in a forceful manner. Okay? Now the other part that we need to work on driving are focusing on our rotational forces. Okay? So not only can we drive our chest linearly, just like we talked about, we can also rotate our chest. So we have rotational force, right? So the biggest thing, I know a lot of guys, a pretty big keyword or buzzword going around in baseball is hip to shoulder separation. So hip to shoulder separation is what we're trying to battle for, but the most basic form of that is what we call the stretch shortening cycle. Okay, so what happens is when we move things accordingly or we rotate in a certain pattern, the next body part that should be firing stretches, and then what does it want to do after it stretches? It wants to return back to its original state. Okay, so if we take, let's just say we take, let's just say we have a piece of yarn, okay? So we take it and we turn it against itself, okay? So we're turning it against itself, right? It's creating all that potential energy, and once you release it, it wants to return back to its original state. This is how we create rotational forces when we pitch, okay? So we use our hips, right, to rotate while our upper body stays back, creating that stretch in our obliques and our posterior chain, right? Most notably, our posterior oblique system is all put on stretch. And then what wants to happen naturally, right, from this position? We naturally, if you want to try it at home or wherever you are, get into this position. It's pretty uncomfortable. You'll feel a stretch on the side of your core. And then from this position, naturally, you want to open back up. It's a force multiplier, right? The more we can get our obliques and our core put on the stretch, the faster our chest is going to rotate back, okay? You'll see in a lot of big league guys, once their front foot gets down, you're going to notice that his hips are facing one direction and his upper body is facing a completely different one. This is what we call the stretch shortening cycle, or hip to shoulder separation, which naturally is a force multiplier and rotates our chest faster, okay? So the next thing that I want to talk about is how these two things, right? So we talked about only about transferring linear forces and rotational forces, right, to the chest. But as we know, there's one more path the ball needs to get to, and it's through our arm, right? And a lot of people always talk about, right, I spoke about this earlier, is that everyone tries to use their arm to throw the ball harder, but all the arm is a transfer of this energy, right? Just like we talked about the stretch shortening cycle for rotating our chest fast, the same thing works with our arm, right? So if we take a lever here, right, our arm, let's just say that's the pitcher's arm, okay? What's gonna happen is when I'm rotating my chest and driving it rotationally and linearly, what's gonna happen naturally, because of those forces, our arm's gonna lay back into external rotation. And that layback and that external rotation puts a huge amount of stretch on our UCLs, our ulnar collateral ligament, our labrum, our rotator cuff muscles. So when we drive our chest with that much force, our arm lays back in space, creating that stretch shortening cycle, that force multiplier, in order to, when it comes back in the internal rotation, it goes a lot faster, right? So the thing is we're trying to create as much stress or stretch in our arm to get that external rotation, and the best way to do it is to either rotate our chest fast or drive our chest as fast as we can in a linear manner, okay? So that really boils down to our theory on pitching and how we get the most velocity out of our guys. And then it really talks about if you're going to make an adjustment, okay? If I'm going to make an adjustment with my pitching, it needs to follow under one of these two categories, right? Either rotational force or linear forces, right? If a coach, any coach or anybody says, try this, try this, try this, it doesn't have to be our theory. It can be whatever theory you draw upon, but make sure when you make an adjustment, right, it needs to fall under your theory of pitching and how you develop velocity. Because if it doesn't, right, you're going back to that 0.99. You're gonna get worse every day, right? Because if you're focusing on the wrong thing and we're practicing it over and over and over and over and over again, you might be working hard, but the thing is, you're getting worse. That's the problem. So make sure, if you're not gonna draw upon our theory of pitching, of whatever adjustment you make is creating more rotational or linear forces, you have to make sure it falls under your theory of whatever that may be, but at least you have the conviction to work on it, and you're going to be working hard. If you guys have any questions on that, feel free to drop a comment. You can DM us. But that's about it.